Hi, I'm April from Still Local. Today we are going to make a patchwork format. To make the patchwork format, we'll need some fusible foam, canvas for backing, an assortment of printed canvases or solids for the front, thread, your 5.5-inch square template, and a few sewing tools. The first step is to make our backing the same size as the piece of foam that came in your kit, which is around 20 by 30 inches. I'm putting the fusible side that's a little bit rough towards the back of the fabric. Now I'm just going to cut this out so they match. Next, we're going to cut out our square template. You can also just use a rotary cutter and ruler to do the same job. You just need 5.5-inch squares. So you should have some leftovers from your backing, and then your kit should have 4 or 5 different canvases to choose from. And if you have any denim or other canvas at home, you can always throw that in. You just have to make sure that it's a heavier weight fabric so that it can wear nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out 2 at a time. I'm going to go ahead and cut the rest of mine with the rotary cutter and ruler because it's faster. I have our foam mat shape out on the table as a template, and now's the fun part. We get to start designing what we want this to look like. And make sure when you're laying them down you remember to overlap because there will be a seam allowance. Okay, I have my design all laid out now. So as we're sewing, I'm going to leave it all laying out like this. I'm going to start at one end, grab these first 2, put them right sides together, and I'm just sewing up 1/4 inch right here so that they can be reopened like this. And then we're going to move on to the next row. We'll sew these 4 together after that. They're going to go right sides together like this and like this, and then we'll add this one on here, right sides together. So then we'll have a nice strip here and a nice strip here, and we're going to keep laying them over the mat, and we'll adjust them as needed to make sure that the whole mat surface is going to be covered. So before you get started, I suggest taking a photo of your layout just in case anything gets messed up. We're going to go for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and end. I just put 1 pin in right away. It's a short seam, you don't necessarily have to pin, but it helps me remember for sure which sides I'm sewing together of the square. So now we have our next row complete. And then we're gonna start grabbing the next row, and we're gonna keep doing this until we run out of squares. Now we have our next row finished. We'll lay that here. Make sure it's covering the mat. We'll have a little bit of overlap on these, and now we're gonna just keep going. I have all my strips sewn up now, and we're gonna go to the iron and press the seams open on the back of all of these strips. Then we'll lay them back out and see how they fit over the mat. If I'm short any pieces, I can use scraps that I have left. And even if some of the pieces are not a full square, as long as they're 5.5 inches tall, I can use those to cover up any spots that I was short in the end. So I'm just gonna grab these one strip at a time. And then I'm gonna lay it back right where it goes. Saves me some time later with trying to figure out where everything was again. Okay, so we have all of these ironed now, and we're missing a piece of this little corner here. So I cut out a rectangle that's 5.5. It wasn't quite wide enough, but that is fine. It's still gonna do the trick and cover this corner that I need. So I'm just gonna put these two together and stitch that so it's part of this piece. Now it is time to start sewing some of our strips together. Yay, fun. So we're not worrying about meeting corners or anything. It's not gonna lay out that way. We're just worried about covering the mat. And I'm actually trying to offset this corner a little bit because the other ones aren't going to join up. So I think it'll look better if all of them are off a little bit. So I'm just gonna flip this over. Throw a few pins in there, and then we're just going to be sewing across here, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And again, we're going with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're going to make sure that's covering. Again, I'm going to try and avoid lining up these corners where they meet, making sure it's covering both of the edges. And then we'll flip this over, pin them together, and sew. Now we are going to iron all of these open, just like we did earlier, and then we'll flip the whole thing over and iron that as well, just to make sure it's nice and open. Okay, so it's all ready now. We're gonna take our foam, and we want our foam to have fabric under it everywhere. So you really have to check, like this corner, I need to move that because it's not going to have fabric. So now we see this one's good. We're good along here. That one's good. So it looks like everything's covered. Because this edge is really close, I'm just gonna pull the whole thing down a tiny, tiny bit like that. And then again, double check that there's fabric under everywhere. If you get to this point and there's fabric missing, that means you're gonna have to add an extra piece of a square on. No big deal. Now we're gonna trim down our fabric so that it's the same size as our foam. Okay, so we're gonna set the top aside for now, and we are going to get the rough side up, lay your backing on the top, line those up the best that they can fit, and then we're gonna iron these together. Rough side up. Now we're gonna place our fabrics right sides together. And if you need to, you can trim your backing down a little bit. Okay, so now in the bottom center, I'm gonna mark a 6-inch opening to leave for turning the mat right side out. And I'm gonna use my mat to help me with that. So this is the no-sew zone. We're gonna be sewing all the way around the rest of the perimeter, and starting and stopping with a back stitch at these 2 lines that I marked. And I'm just gonna use some wonder clips. You can use pins if you want to hold these together. So we've got our 2 fabrics right sides together, and you can see the foam on the bottom. Now we're going to trim down our corners. And we're going to flip the whole thing so it's not inside out anymore. You can put your hand in the hole and grab one of the corners and then pull it through. Now it's time to press. So we're just gonna find that edge and make a crisp line right here. When you get to the hole that we left at the bottom, you're gonna wanna tuck the raw edges inside so we don't see those, and then press. And then when we sew around the edges here, that's all gonna stay tucked in. I'll put a few wonder clips there just to hold it. Now we're gonna top stitch all the way around. Just lengthening my stitch. Our last step is to stitch in the ditch. So we're just going to be stitching right over the lines that are straight. We're not going on these ones where they're kind of broken up, just the ones that are going this way. And we're stitching through the whole thing, so those lines will show up on your back here. So you want to try and get your needle lined up the best you can right in the ditch between these two. So you can hardly see the stitches. Sometimes they're right beside, it's totally fine. And then on the back you have a nice straight line here. And when I'm sewing, I'm watching this line up with the presser foot, the opening in it. That's helping me do nice straight lines.